Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Always delighted to explore academia and the worlds of critical literacy, and in this case, critical media literacy. So glad on this episode to finally be meeting Zoom to Zoom Dr. Renee Hobbs. May I call you Renee? Is that okay?
Please.
All right, all right. I'll mention a couple of accolades at the beginning of our talk, and then we can explore any of those further that you would like. EDD from Harvard University, first of all. Dissertation, you were talking about my dissertation, but dissertation in synchrony among the visual and the verbal in television. You know, I'm a big fan of exploring the visual and the verbal and the way that those elements come together in multimodality. And I'll also mention a couple of titles. So you're one of the uh, founding minds behind Media Education Lab, one of those projects. Mind Over Media, I had the chance to review for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, Media Literacy in Action. And Reading the Media was probably the first book that I discovered of yours. I'm sensing a theme here of media. I'm hearing the word media. It's sort of like the motif, if I can point that out. So
Yeah, sure.
yeah, curious about your draw to critical media literacy in the world of education.
I started out as an English literature major at the University of Michigan. And
Mhm.
at that time, there was a brand new program called Film Video Studies. I was constantly in my poetry and Brit Lit classes trying to figure out how to talk about Gilligan's Island
Yeah, yeah,
and popular culture. And
yeah.
I got to write in a film class, I got to write a 50-page paper on Saturday Night Fever when it came out in theaters, right? And
Nice.
this was one of the funnest things I ever did. So I feel like I've been trying to combine the practices of what I learned in literature class, what I learned studying film in a serious way,
Hmm.
and what I learned as a filmmaker and as a media maker and
Yeah.
as a journalist. I feel like I've been trying to combine those dots all the way through, threaded around a focus on the practices of teaching and learning.
I love it. I love it. And one of the recurring themes that I have in my classroom is that idea of mise en scène and how everything in a creative space is there by an intentional choice with intentional design, be it a film screen, television screen, comic book page, prose novel, whatever it happens to be. You and I both chose books as our background, for example. Intentional pairing. We're sharing about books. So really appreciate the work that you do. Curious about the importance for you of maintaining criticality. Why is criticality an important aspect of what we do?
Well, this word critical is really complicated, isn't it?
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
It's a really complicated word, and its history
Makes
is
people
really
nervous. Yeah.
complicated.
Hmm.
Um, in the I'll talk kind of trace historically the trajectory of my understanding of that concept, right?
Hmm.
Um, One of the things we recognized early on in teaching and learning media literacy was that critical questions were really important to lead learners into the spirit of inquiry, the
Hmm.
journey of inquiry. So critical questions is a foundational concept in media literacy, as we're asking people to reflect on the interpretive process. We're asking people to notice, gain awareness of the constructed nature of media representations. And we're understanding that media messages are constructed within social institutions that are political and economic, that have the baggage, the weight of consumer culture
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
commodity capitalism behind them, underneath them, and around them at all times. So critical questions is just a shorthand term for all of that. In the media literacy movement, we have so much in common, but we tend to like argue about small differences, like
Mhm.
academics do. We get there's a certain kind of status associated with arguing over small differences. It's
Right, right.
time honored practice since the Greeks, right?
Very true, very true.
Part of the nature of knowledge is to argue over small differences. So I've had over 30 years, lots of arguments in public and private places about what does critical mean, and when is it useful to deploy the term?
Hmm, hmm.
Okay. So as an academic, and as I'm located in a school of communication, my specialty is media studies. I'm teaching about propaganda and media culture. The concept of criticality, absolutely central. Every university student gets introduced to issues of power, representation right
Hmm,
away. These are
hmm.
central ideas. My experience working with elementary and secondary teachers, right, going all the way back to the late 80s and early 90s, is that the word critical has got some risk attached to it,
Hmm.
because it's about critical of whom and what. And as you know, education scholars have noticed for over 100 years, questioning power is definitely not not something that not something that you do lightly,
Right.
right?
Hmm,
Because education institutions are designed to reproduce the status quo power dynamics of a culture.
hmm.
So in working with elementary school and secondary teachers, I have often emphasized, or I've even maybe sidestepped the power, and especially the political economic dimensions of media power,
Hmm,
in part because teachers don't have a lot of background knowledge about that, right?
hmm.
That's not a place of strength for many teachers who barely understand, how is it that Facebook is free? Like,
Right.
why is that? um, so uh, inviting teachers to sort of work from positions of strength
Hmm,
means critical questions critical questions that teachers don't even know the answers to themselves is a better way to position the co-learning of media literacy, right?
hmm, hmm.
And the danger of critical media literacy when folks in the university come down to elementary and secondary schools is that it becomes a whole load of content. You should know that only 6 companies control all media companies. You should know that,
Hmm.
Comcast owns NBC Universal. And it's like, mm, how's that going to help the kid be a critical reader?
Right, right.
Or is it
Hmm.
going to cultivate a kind of hate, a kind of resentment, a kind of us versus them dynamic? And that's not my intention with media literacy.
Yeah, yeah. I like the way you're speaking to all the nuances of that. And I'll also mention in Mind Over Media, the way you explore propaganda is so nuanced, examining the positive, the negative, all of the potential aspects, and love that central focus on questioning because critical doesn't necessarily mean negative. And if someone is critical of me, sometimes it's easy to take it as a negative, but it's a much different term in this case.
Yeah, one of the insights that we have this really cool project called Courageous Rhode Island, and it's a big media literacy. It's a whole of society media initiative that involves using media literacy dialogue and discussion experiences with adults, with teachers, and with children. Right,
Mhm.
and one of the things that we're learning to spot all the ways in our own discourses and in our own like ordinary talk and life we set up us versus them frameworks. We set up conflict frameworks, and conflict frameworks can be useful. They're damn entertaining, as you know. I mean, a good comic book writer is going to think really carefully about the representation of conflict all the way through
Sure.
every panel, right? Every page.
Hmm,
Um,
hmm.
but if we're trying to create a culture where we reduce the hate and fear that leads to violence,
Hmm.
like if we're
Hmm.
really serious about that, then we have to look at the way in which critical comes to become a judgment
Hmm.
that then is used to put people into boxes and create hierarchies and ultimately um, uh, limit our ability to see our complex humanity, our complex shared humanity.
Yeah, yeah. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about text is the centering of the human being, the sharing of the human story and multiple human stories, and the way that text can be very democratizing in that way.
Yeah. What do you think, Jason? Do you think that we can ever get to a place where we understand literacy as the sharing of meaning through symbols?
I hope so. I hope so. That has its own hierarchy of ways that people approach text too. But if we could just get to this place where we're recognizing that reading words means that I'm encountering multiple strings of very small symbols that we've just sort of arranged and agreed upon, then I think that might be a positive step too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the websites I really love, I love entering into creative communities where people are engaging in critical reading together, right?
Hmm.
You're doing that with the comic community, the graphic novel community. That's
Hmm.
a really important thing. And there's a community of photojournalists organized around a practice they call reading the pictures or seeing the pictures, reading the pictures, I think it's called. And it's basically a online community where people gather to talk about photojournalism. And what
Hmm.
it mostly is let's look at this one artifact, this one text, and
Yeah.
then we're going to hear all these different readings. And it's mind blowing because of the way how photojournalists read photojournalism is different than how a news consumer reads it, and
Hmm.
an art historian reads it differently, right, than a young a computer science major, and all of those readings together, um, getting exposed to them is it's humbling, it's clarifying, and it actually makes me feel really optimistic. I do feel like reading clubs or
Hmm.
reading
Hmm.
and writing clubs around all our favorite genres is a way forward in thinking about it. It moves beyond the concept of participatory culture and fandom, by the way.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
So it's definitely distinct from that. But I do feel like it's all guided by this set of critical questions that we ask when we encounter text, starting with, how does it make you feel?
Yeah. Yeah. But I love the idea of critiquing and exploring images and words, and also what you said there about optimism. That's sort of an optimistic view of where we're headed with literacy. I think at heart, as an educator, you almost have to be at least somewhat of an optimist, or you at least have to have optimistic moments, because I think there is that movement forward. Hopefully, we hope.
Ah,
Yeah,
yes, optimism is a complicated thing, isn't it?
it
Over
is.
time, it's hard to maintain, but there's no alternative to it, really. The
Yeah.
alternative is despair, and nobody wants to live a life of despair.
Agreed. Agreed. So you mentioned teachers a little while ago and entering classrooms, K-12, whatever spot in the range you happen to want to be thinking through. Curious about what you would want to share with teachers, an idea, a strategy, a critical question, something to think about as they're listening.
Mm. So many things. Media literacy got a lot more attention in the K-12 world after the rise of so-called fake news, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And a
Hmm.
lot of educators, when they hear the term media literacy, they think about disinformation, fake news, propaganda, and that's great because that is one of the critical questions we want people to ask is this accurate or inaccurate?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's
True enough.
important. And how do you know?
Yeah.
Right? So, and that's an epistemological question, right? So this is very important, no doubt about it, but it isn't the only question.
Hmm.
And for people who are working with adolescents in middle school and high school and in college, it may not be the best entry point, right?
Hmm.
And actually, it may foreshorten the depth of engagement if I basically say, oh, well, you know how you find out what's true? You go online and you compare what everybody else thinks. And if everybody thinks this is true, then it's true. And you're
Right.
like, ooh,
Truth by majority.
is that really the what is that? We want to simplify it that much? I don't think so.
Mm.
But lateral reading practice is basically a practice now, being promoted as a kind of media literacy. And yeah, for sure, it's fine, but it isn't
Mhm.
the only thing. And it's why I'm hoping teachers kind of return to thinking about the developmental needs of the learner in their classroom and the central issues that personal and social identity play
Mhm.
for the developing adolescent. And when we put identity in the center, when we think about the critical questions of media literacy in relation to identity, then all kinds of opportunities await
Mhm.
as we invite students to think about how they represent their own identity
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
in the
Uh-huh.
photos they take, in the selfies they take, and in the way they represent themselves with language and text messages and emojis and all the rest. And it also invites us to think about the issues of who do we trust in relation to the influencers around us,
Mhm.
the peer influencers, right? The family member influencers and the social media influencers. And so I do think that the study of influencers is really an important topic for adolescents. And it's so refreshing to see the depth of their thinking about why do they pay attention to
Mhm.
different kinds of influencers, right? And it invites critical questions about um, media influence
Mhm.
because we all like to think, oh, other people are influenced by media but not me,
Right.
right? But when you actually think about, you make a list of the influencers in your life, it it gives you pause.
Mhm.
Who are you letting influence you? And it's a conversation that is super important for adolescents. And I think it's really related to the study of literature too, right?
Mhm.
Because
Absolutely.
through literature we get to think about our identity, and we get to think about identity as it's represented in different media forms. So it's a little bit of a shift that I'm aiming to move the community toward, not because fake news isn't important, not because disinformation isn't important. Those are still really important topics, but
Mhm.
uh, thinking about conflict entrepreneurs is also important, and especially looking at how that topic is an easy way to connect issues of identity
Mhm.
and choice with issues of the political economy of the media,
Yeah.
because the folks who are getting likes and clicks on Facebook and and TikTok now
Mhm.
are driven by a economics of engagement,
Mhm.
right? And a
Mhm.
set of algorithms underneath them where outrageousness and conflict are uh, a really great way to get popular.
Right.
And students can and love to interrogate that question. And it's a really great way to motivate their curiosity
Mhm.
about the choices that people make about, um, participating in contemporary society.
Yeah. Yeah. But as you mentioned, some conflict is necessary. There's always conflict, and I'm just thinking about moving from the idea that talking about media, talking about um, literacy and messages in the news is conflict driven to, also talked about community there, which I really appreciate because I love that idea of approaching the classroom as a critical community where conflicts sometimes happen, but it's conflict is not the center. It's not the center. It's a part of the process.
So true. So true. The thing I love best about media literacy and why I've been in it for so long, I didn't think it would be such a generative topic as it's turned out to be, but media
Hmm.
systems are constantly changing, right? And so as a result, media literacy is a moving target. It keeps changing in response to the changes in media and technology and society. And one of the things that, to return to this issue of like, what does criticality mean
Hmm.
in media literacy? It's absolutely uh, going to invite us to think about how um, how the systems that are normative
Hmm.
are how they delight us and how they trouble us at the same time. Like, I love algorithmic personalization on Netflix. I am constantly getting a stream of movies that I probably am going to like.
Yeah, yeah.
I hate algorithmic personalization on Netflix because I am trapped from ever seeing anime,
Hmm. Right.
ever seeing South Korean sitcoms,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I have to really search for Bollywood movies, right? Because they're not going to get presented to me unless I disrupt my algorithm. And
Yeah.
I feel like interrogating the love-hate relationship has always been a foundational media literacy practice. And I feel like teachers should never skip over that.
Hmm.
That's a beginning of the year or beginning of the semester activity that is so essential because we keep getting older and older. Our students stay the same age, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So how you every year, Jason, reconnecting with your students about what are they loving and what's troubling them is going to give you a lot of insights. It goes back to what Len Masterman said, 30 years ago in his seminal book, Reading the Media.
Hmm.
Um, teaching the media, that basically you shouldn't develop a curriculum for media literacy. You should begin with the learner's lived experience of media culture and build your curriculum from there. Now,
Yeah.
most of us are too scared to do that, or we have administrators who don't let us do that.
Right, right.
But I always introduce my syllabus at the beginning of the year and say, I had to create this, right? So here's one direction the class could go in, but because we're talking about your experience with media, there's a lot of directions this class can go in. And
Mhm.
I love that because then I'm off the stage. I'm not the expert. I don't have to know everything. I just have to be a co-learner
Yeah.
and guide students toward a learning. And because when students are driving the train with their own critical questions and with their own texts that they want to interrogate themselves, I learned so much more.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
in a way, it's a very selfish pedagogy because it puts me in a position of, harvesting a lot of learning myself along with my students.
Yeah, yeah. But it amazes me how students who might not even identify as a reader, they might say, "Oh, I don't like to read," or "I'm not very good at reading," or whatever it is. By virtue of having that cellular device, they are constantly engaged in really, really active reading processes. And of course, they don't get a pop-up box that says, "By the way, you're developing this particular part of reading," but it totally is happening all the time. So I
That's a
love
great
that
point.
approach for guiding that.
Great point. Absolutely. Often my students want to talk about the media text that they think teachers will like. So they'll say, "Oh, I get the Sunday New York Times." Like, "Oh, okay, great."
Hmm.
But how about if we talk about fantasy football,
Right.
right? Because I
Hmm.
know you're playing, I know you're gambling, right? And if I can create a safe and trustworthy space in the classroom where it's okay for you to talk about your more transgressive media experiences, or the media experiences that you don't think fit into the hierarchy of what counts as quality, usually the conversations get much deeper, and students are actually genuinely benefiting from hearing different perspectives on those texts, right? So some of the most, even in my textbook, media literacy in action, there's a whole section on pornography. I think teaching about pornography is an important part of media literacy education, and teachers can find ways to have conversations about pornography without showing any pornography at all.
That's right. That's right. And what qualifies as pornography changes with time as well. Yeah.
So true. So true. So true. In fact, what a fascinating inquiry for students to go on. Right. So I do feel like the media literacy, the reason why media literacy continues to gain momentum is in part because it carries with it a set of pedagogical practices that are so strong and dynamic. I am aware of the fears that some of my colleagues have. Even 30 years ago, when I first started doing this, I remember my department chair said to me something like, well, Renee, so if you're successful in redefining the concept of text so that it means anything, any form of symbolic expression, not just the little black squiggles on the white paper, then ultimately you will be contributing to the decline of print reading, because you equalize the value of these symbols. And I had to say to him, yeah, guilty as charged. But that's a cultural shift that's far beyond my little role as professor. I'm following. I'm not leading that. Not leading that train. I'm following that train. And it's been underway, as Marshall McLuhan showed us, for 80 years. So I think the full force of human intelligence can be deployed on all the media texts in our lived experience, and it enriches our lives when we are open to that practice.
Absolutely. Agreed. So we've reached the resources portion of the episode, those materials that you would be sharing with teachers. Did you know we were talking about comics and you mentioned influencers? Dave Pilkey came out with a new graphic novel today called Cat Kid Comic Club Influencers. So he's exploring this idea for younger audiences.
Can't wait to see it. That sounds great.
Yeah. And you mentioned the purpose of schools being, to some degree, sort of reconstituting social hierarchy, social status. Jean Anion, I would mention to anyone out there listening, would be a great resource. But I'm talking too much. Any particular resources that you would want to share? Readingthepictures.org, it looks like being one of those.
10 courageous questions for promoting dialogue and discussion about media literacy in ways that reduce the hate and fear that leads to violence. Really excited about that. And for people who want to see what a courageous conversation looks like, the portal, we're so excited about this. We collaborated with an organization called Cortico. They're part of MIT's Center for Constructive Communication. And it's a tool that lets you listen in on some of the 700 people who participated in our courageous conversations on topics like propaganda, conflict entrepreneurs, falling down the rabbit hole, radicalization, preventing violent extremism, and more.
All right. I'm grabbing those links and I'll make sure to put them in the video and audio. Hey, I would also mention you have lots of resources in print and in digital format as well. And we've alluded to some of them. Yeah.
And one thing we're really excited, you'll see it probably before you launch this, is the Media Education Lab website is now going to overhaul completely. Next week, we'll pull the trigger and the website will be new. The logo will be new, but we're really excited about the 2 professional development programs that we're launching in 2024 in January. One's called the Media Ed Forum. It's a 2-day online sort of intense series of conversations. And then the other is a 6-week format. We're trying out the Summer Institute in Digital Literacy in online and in the winter. And
Nice.
it's a really great learning community. That really, the Media Education Lab is at its heart a learning community. So yes, there are resources. Yes, there are curriculum materials. Yes, there are videos. Yes, there are research publications. But the most important part of the Media Education Lab is the community of people who gather for dialogue and discussion to learn from each other in ways that kind of similar to your podcast, like bring people together for co-learning.
Love it. Love it. And thanks for the kind nod to the podcast as well. That's the words, images, and worlds direction, vision. Absolutely. Very Fierian.
Cool. It was great talking to you, Jason. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, great to talk with you. And as I mentioned, we've been in touch many different ways through email and different means, but great to be in touch by Zoom. And who knows, we might even meet in person at a conference at some
Yeah.
point or something like
Yeah.
that.
You know, I would really love to have a panel discussion
Yeah.
on teaching film
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a way that shows the diversity of practices that you found in your dissertation and that I've seen in the classroom with teachers from, here in Providence, Rhode Island, but also all around the world. I feel like film needs a little love.
Agreed. 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 Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
A
In
film in
many
the age
different
of
ways.
streaming media, so many possibilities.
Yeah. I sign me up for that anytime, any space. All right. Well, thank you again for your time ahead of a holiday week, and I'm glad to be in touch.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Jason. Bye-bye.
Thank you.